Hello, I'm Suzanne James. Welcome to Nightshift, where we talk all things voluntary assisted dying in Australia. Those of you who listened last week would have heard me talk to the lovely Mike Gaffney. Mike is the independent MP in Tasmania who was responsible for carriage of their voluntary assisted dying laws back in 2022. Today I'm happy to continue our series on Tasmania, and we will be joined by retired Dr. Albert Shugg. Bert has recently taken on the role of President of Dying With Dignity Tasmania, and he joins us now from Hobart. Bert, welcome.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Now, before we start on the machinations of what's happening down there with VAD, tell us about yourself, Bert. What is your professional clinical background, and how did you come to be the President of Dying With Dignity Tasmania?
So, Suzanne, I'm a Tasmanian by birth. I did my primary medical degree in Hobart and my postgraduate qualifications on the mainland and overseas. So, in my adolescence, I spent a lot of time on my uncles, and I have a number of them who are farmers. And I witnessed the appropriate euthanasia of animals in distress, and it was part of farming life. And it was an end stage in someone or an animal that was suffering. I then entered university with an aim of becoming a rural GP and appreciated the first few years of my medical degree were learning about what it is to be healthy and then what it might be that would cause you to become unhealthy and ultimately probably die. When I entered postgraduate training, I then started to learn a little bit more about how you might stop people from dying or save them from dying. And then when I then finished my postgraduate training, I went into a rural general practice in northwest Tasmania. And that was very important for me. I firstly learnt about the purpose of family in a family practice, but in a rural context. And death in a rural context is very different than my subsequent understanding about what death means to an aging population in an urban environment. But as I progressed through medicine, death became much more of an issue that if someone was going to die, it was a natural process, and it didn't mean that as a doctor, that if someone was going to die, that it didn't mean that you had failed them. Clearly, there was a concern as a paediatrician, particularly dealing with neonates, and I had a responsibility for children with cancer. We were doing our best to keep them alive, to save them. But that wasn't always possible, and it was really important that they not be abandoned when things were not able to be cured or treated in a humane way. And I suppose towards the end of my career, I became more and more concerned that medicine should not abandon those people that are dying and should treat them in a way that you might be treating them to try and save them.
So,
So
voluntary assisted dying obviously is a natural extension of that.
Yes, well, that was my. So when I actually retired from medicine, I'd moved from a consultancy in Hobart back to the rural environment for the last 10 years of my career, and I had a teaching responsibility. And it was also that I realised that the medical curriculum for undergraduate students again did not talk about death in a way that I'd imagined and appreciated that it should be over my career. And I tried to address that in the best way possible. But there needs to be some changes in the medical curriculum, I think, for undergraduates to emphasise that death is an important part of understanding of life. And I was very fortunate. I joined the Dying With Dignity Tasmania group online, and the next morning I had a call from the then president, Hilda Nielsen, who I'd known for a while as she was a nurse in the private hospital attached to my hospital in Hobart, and asked if I would join the committee. And unfortunately, Hilda had a terrible accident, of which she is recovering, fortunately, in February, a year ago today, and she was not able to continue on with her presidency, and she asked if I would take on that role. We have
I
a
re-
very strong committee of very experienced women that has been a great privilege for me to join. They have many more skills than I do in sort of secretarial work, business administration. So they decided that me, because I seem to have ability to do a bit of talking, maybe waffling on a bit too much, they thought, well, you can do this. And I've had great fun in the last 12 months, mainly in trying to engage with people that we think are influential in the VAD space in Tasmania. I have not had much contact with the national grouping as I probably should, but at the moment we're focusing on Tasmania. Although our organisation in Tasmania is small, we have about 120 paid up members and 50 unpaid members. The committee, which is of seven, I'm the only male. Half of them have been involved for probably over 10 years. And right at the beginning of the journey that eventuated in Tasmania's legislation, legislation in 2021, under the great leadership of Mike Gaffney.
Now, I understand a wonderful Margaret is one of your numbers. She was responsible for Dying with Dignity Tasmania, doing that wonderful submission to the Northern Territory inquiry, for which we thank her very much. Is
That's
Margaret on your board?
Yes, on our committee. So Margaret Singh. Margaret is an extremely experienced public servant in the parliamentary sphere, and she has great abilities.
Well, shout out to you, Margaret, and thank you very much for that fantastic submission. It was one of 400 plus that were ultimately received, and it's looking like we'll get the legislation in the Territory this year. So I'd like to move on now, Bert, to what's happening this upcoming year in Tasmania.
Yeah.
Now heading in to the 2026 statutory review. I understand from Mike Gaffney that the terms of reference in the committee itself is imminent, yeah?
Yeah, so the Department of Health published a terms of reference and an application form in sort of September, October of last year. And we understood that the committee was to be appointed and advertised in late September. But for various reasons, it hasn't happened yet. But I understand from Mike that it's imminent, that a three-member review panel is to be announced. As I said, the terms of reference were published late last year. However, we are yet to hear from the committee as to how they plan to proceed with their interpretation of the terms of reference. Now, the
Right.
terms of reference says that it will be targeted consultations, and I might just review that. Targeted consultations and a public surveys. How
Excellent.
they're going to analyse that data, I don't know. I'm very keen to find out. I understand that the Victorian Review Panel utilised the resources of the Health Department in Victoria. I hope that they will do that in Tasmania or the university, but that's not yet clear. One of the things that I found important in my role as president is that I have made an effort to speak to colleagues that are now practicing both in the VAD space, but also those that might be intending to become involved. And it's clear, although the VAD Commission in its most recent report defended the integrity of the current data collecting system, they also have made on the last two reports a recommendation that the data system be reviewed.
Now, Mark told me that it's actually progressing quite well, the question of the online portal, and that the health minister down there now is on board and they're looking at how soon they can get that to happen. So that's great news. So, apart from the VAD portal, and you've been having discussions, as you said, with
Yeah.
current clinicians in the VAD space, what are some of the other key issues that they and you, as president of Dying with Dignity Tasmania, are concerned about?
We have two issues. One, the time to death prognosis and the residency requirement. Both of those are clauses in our Act. We are very much aligned with the developments that have occurred in the ACT. So we're very keen to promote the approach to death rather than the time to death prognosis implications of the Act.
Yeah.
So we will be certainly pursuing a similar agenda that the ACT has done with regards to time to death prognosis or approaching death, time of death, where there is an emphasis on clinical appreciation or clinical evaluation of the patient, the applicant's circumstance, rather than some arbitrary decision around the time in which you're going to die, which in my clinical experience has always been fraught with difficulty. Yeah, now the other matter is around the issue of residency. We have a very specific clause in Tasmania, which is a little more liberal than the original clause in the Victorian Act, says that you have to be a continuous resident of Tasmania. This, in some respect, I challenged our commission around what this actually meant, and particularly, was there any mechanism of exemption? And although we don't have the same exemption forms in Tasmania as they do in Queensland, the Commission will accept requests for exempting from any of the clauses in our Act, which was great. But the process about how to go about it does seem to me a little complicated. And maybe if that can be improved would be another issue that we would like to pursue. The other matter that has come to our attention, particularly through Mike Gaffney's notice of motion in the Legislative Council, and this is the Go Gentle report on the circumstance of residential aged care.
Sorry, when did he move that?
That was late last year in December. And so he introduced to the state parliament the document that Go Gently had produced around residential aged care, and made the comment that in fact Tasmania has done fairly well. So you would aware that the Go Gentle document surveyed a number of aged care residential facilities around Australia.
Did a very thorough job of it too.
Yeah, and Tasmania actually has done quite well. And we are pleased about that, but we are also concerned that a proportion, as in the mainland states, of those people that are wanting to access VAD can either do it at home or in some other environmental place of their choosing. But there are those that want to choose a private facility, not necessarily a state government facility, but a private facility. And the problem in Tasmania, evolving in the south of the state, is that the only private hospitals are now run by the Catholic institutions.
Yeah, but Tasmania isn't the only one with that problem. We've got major issues with that in New South Wales especially.
So we are waiting to see, although we were pleased, if that's the right word, that a very recent VAD applicant accessed the VAD in a Catholic facility, and that was allowed to happen. So that, in combination with the fact that there has been a change in the Catholic hierarchy in Tasmania with a new Archbishop who may be a little more liberal than the previous one. So we are hoping that, in fact, that this potential dilemma around accessing facilities run by the Catholic Church may not necessarily be a block.
So I understand from Mike Gaffney and from what I've seen and read, Bert, that Tasmanian people hold VAD very close to their heart. It's very, very well supported in the community. People are very grateful to be able to access it. Is that the feedback you regularly get from the community?
Yes. Look, it's just a great acknowledgement. I think Mike Gaffney's done over 140 community presentations of his mission to legalise VAD in Tasmania, and that's overwhelming, and it's right across the state. I mean, how can anyone have the energy to do that? No, we have a very much smaller approach, maybe because we are just a small organisation, but we've focused on the elderly. We've focused on some community endeavours that have incorporated a whole range of issues around death. But we've got a lot more to do, Suzanne, and I hope that this is going to be part of our encouragement of the community to be involved in the review process. I think that's really important. There are a lot of people that support it, but also there are a lot of people that actually don't speak up. So we want them to speak up and want them to become involved in the review panel. I do believe that my understanding of who is going to be on the review panel will be people that have had good life experience and will be balanced and understanding in their approach and are going to present to the Parliament an important case. We can't anticipate what it'll be, but I hope that we are going to follow the models that have evolved in the other states and particularly in the ACT.
And of course, Bert, one of the issues we often see is that people wait too long, till too late in their illness before they apply for voluntary assisted dying. What's your view on that?
Look, I think there are two matters. I think that number one, that doctors are not so good at talking about dying and when in fact the circumstance, and maybe there are patients that are not prepared to hear it until the late stage.
Yeah, it
But
is
so there's
difficult.
one, the communication issues between the doctor and their patient. The second thing is that at the end stage of life, with both the stresses, the physiological stresses of their illness, but also the medications that are being used to relieve, I think that it does cloud cognitive capacity and competence. And that's then going to become a limitation of whether or not their application for VAD is going to be successful. So we are very much into informing patients that they have a right to discuss this matter well before they may need it. And if we can remove the time to death prognosis, then they will be able to do that.
It's like most things in healthcare, it takes a lot longer than people think, and it's not till you've had a bit of clinical or care experience that you understand just how long some of these things can take, despite everybody's best efforts.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Bert. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you this afternoon.
Right, and my pleasure, and I hope maybe that sometime in 12 months or so, when we've been through the review process, that you might be interested to see how it's evolved.
I absolutely will be keeping tabs on what's going on down there in Tassie, and we'll be speaking to Dr. MacArthur, one of your current VAD lead clinicians, in a couple of weeks' time. So we look forward to
Lovely.
that too. Yeah.
Thanks, Suzanne.
You've been listening to Bert Shugg, President of Dying With Dignity Tasmania, talk to us about the incoming review down there and also the online portal, which we hope to see get up soon. I'm Suzanne James. Thank you for listening to Nightshift.